Hi, I fly radio control helicopters at Park Hall Heli Club in the UK. It's based in Derbyshire, and I think it's fair to say that most club members fly either aligned T-Rex models or Saab Goblin models. It's also fair to say that most members probably use Mikado V-bars of some sort as their fly-barless controllers, although like any club there are always alternative models and fly-barless controllers in use. So this series of videos was set up and intended for the use of one of our club members who, whilst he flies this T-Rex 500L Dominator model, he uses the Spectrum AR7210BX. There's no one else at the club that's got an AR7210BX, so he found it really difficult to get his head around the setup on the Heli, and being relatively new to the hobby, that just compounded his problems. So I put this series of videos together to help him, and hopefully it'll help you too. So in order to carry out a setup on a similar Heli that you may have, you're going to obviously need your Heli. You're going to need a suitable transmitter, the manual that came with the Heli. You're going to also need a digital pitch gauge, a swash plate leveler, and the dongle which allows you to connect your laptop to the AR7210BX. Now the AR7210BX can actually be set up using your transmitter, and there is actually no requirement to connect a laptop into the 7210BX to set it up. I've always used computer software to set up my fly-barless units. I find it's easy to do, it's more obvious what you're setting and what you're changing. The problem is that there's no videos that I'm aware of online to help set up the 7210BX with a laptop. Most of the videos and most of the forums talk about setting it up just using the transmitter, and that's why we basically came to the conclusion that we needed this set of videos. Before we carry on with this video, I will make one important point. Obviously RC helicopters, including this T-Rex 500L Dominator, are not toys, and obviously if you don't set them up and use them correctly, they can cause serious injury and possibly even death. Obviously we'd recommend that you read the manual carefully and make a conscious effort to make sure that what you're doing is safe for yourself, but also other people that may be in the vicinity. We accept no responsibility or liability for the operation of your model, and as the user of such product, then it's your sole responsibility to make sure you're operating it in a manner that does not endanger yourself or others. That's the boring stuff out of the way. Now let's get on with setting up the model. So we'll start by setting up a new model in the transmitter. So if we hold down the back and the clear buttons together as we turn the transmitter on, when it boots up, let go of it. If we then follow the instructions on the screen and click the roller and go roll down to model select, click it, and we want to go down and select new model and roll across to select create. Once we've done that, if we back out of it, and you can see that it's created a new Heli model for us. We then need to set a few generic settings, so we'll click the roller, we'll roll down to system setup menu, click that. It reminds us that it's going to stop transmitting, so we select yes, and we can then work through this menu. It could be that your transmitter had defaulted to an aeroplane instead of a heli type, so in which case select model type and you could change it to whatever you required. Once you've got the model you require, select yes, it's going to tell you that it's going to reset all the data. We want it to do that, so we're quite happy. The next thing then is to select model name. You obviously need to give it a unique name so that you can remember which model this setup relates to. And once you've done that, then select the back button. If we then go into swash type, I think it defaults to normal. It's shown here at the bottom of the screen. That is what the AR7210BX requires. So if any of the other swash types are selected, it's just a matter of rolling down, highlighting the one you want, and then once you've done that, then press the back button. Then move down to flight mode setup. I like to use flight modes with my helis. At the moment you can see that it's defaulting the flight mode to switch B, and this is this switch here, which is the one that I like to use. You'll see that the hold switch is inhibited, so we'll roll down to the hold switch, click that, and we'll select switch H, and that's this switch here at the back of the heli, and again that's the one that I like to use, and that is all we need to do with it. So we come back out of that. I'm not interested in any of these spoken flight modes. I'm not interested in changing the channel assignments. Trim setup. Flybarless units don't like any trim set on the transmitter. They interpret this as an input, and for instance if you had a bit of rudder trimming, then the heli would continually pirouette if you were hands off. So we need to disable the trims, so we'll go into trim setup, and for throttle we'll select that to 0. We'll do the same for aileron, we'll do the same for elevator, we'll do the same for rudder. Everything's inhibited on the right hand side, and the left and right trim we don't need to worry about, so we'll back out of there. Model utilities allows you to select which model you want and change the order in the list, so we're not interested in that. Warnings, again, I'm not using any telemetry, so I shan't be using that. Pre-flight setup, I'm not going to use that one. Frame rate, that's something I'm interested in. So the default frame rate is 22 microseconds, and I'm going to set that to 11 because that's the maximum rate that the AR7210BX can operate at. And you'll see that it gives you a warning saying when this is selected you've got to use digital servos. On this heli they're all digital servos, so that's not a problem, so we'll back out of that. Bind we'll come to later. Trainer I'm not interested in. Digital switch setup I'm not interested in doing. Center tone I'm not interested in. Sound utilities I'm not interested in. System settings I'm not interested in. If you wanted to, you could transfer it to the SD card so you've got a backup of it, but effectively that is the system setup complete. So we'll back out of that. The heli will boot up as normal, and there you can see we've got our T-Rex 500L model with a helicopter model. The timer's defaulted to 5 minutes, and notice around the outside that the trim positions are empty, so we know we've inhibited the trims. If I now move any of the trim switches, then basically it has no effect, which is what we want. So if we press the roller, quickly go into the function list. And the reason I always like to set up a new model is because when you set up a new model it defaults the travel for all channels to 100, 100. If we go into the sub trim, they're all defaulted to 0. If we go into reverse, all the servos are set in the same direction, and the speed for the servos is all set at normal. If we go to the dual rate and expo, you can see that for the aileron channel the dual rates are set at 100, the expos are set at 0, and if we were to look at the elevator channel and the rudder channel, they're all the same. I will change those later on, but for the time being we'll leave those set at default. If we go into throttle cut, not really appropriate for an electric heli, you can see that that is inhibited. If we go into throttle curve, you see all the throttle curves are straight line curves from 0 at the bottom left to 100% at the top right, so 45-degree curves. And if we look at the different flight modes, if I select flight mode 1 or flight mode 2, they're all the same. And throttle hold at the moment is defaulted to 0%. I came out of the function list by mistake, so I'll go back into there, So we were looking at throttle curves, so we'll move down to pitch curves, and the pitch curves for all flight modes are 45 degrees from bottom left of 0 to top right of 100. We'll back out of there. The gyro at the moment is inhibited. We will play around with that later. I'm not using governor mode, so again that's inhibited. Tail curves is also inhibited. There's no mixing in there at all at the moment. The timer's defaulted to 5 minutes. I'm not interested in telemetry, not interested in custom voice setup, not interested in monitor, and the system setup menu we've already been through, so we go back to the start screen. So the beauty of setting up a new model is that you know everything is set to default, and that's a really good place to start from. So as a point of safety, before we start working on the Heli, I'm going to take off the main blades and the tail blades, and I'm also going to disconnect the motor wires. And you can see just here that I've disconnected the motor wires. You only need to disconnect any two, but I've disconnected all three, it doesn't really matter. At some point during the setup we'll need to put back on the main blades and we'll need to put back on the tail blades, but even when we do that there's no danger of the Heli going for a short flight around the room whilst ever those motor wires remain disconnected. And we'll leave those motor wires disconnected until we've completed the whole of the setup. So the next thing I'm going to do is disconnect all the servo wires, because what I don't want to do is for the servos to burn out whilst they're connected, whilst I'm going through the early part of the setup sequence where we've not set the correct center pulse width and we've not set the correct frequency. So I'll only connect those servo wires again when I need to. You'll also notice that some of the wires are hanging down, so all I've done at this stage is approximately route the wires where they will eventually go. Once the setup is complete, then I'll route the wires properly using cable ties to hold them in position to make sure those wires are not anywhere close to any moving parts. You may ask why I've not cable tied the servo wires at this stage. Experience has taught me that you're probably best to wait till the end of the setup, because you get all your cabling nice and neat and then find for whatever reason you need to take the servo out, so effectively you're just wasting your time. So to get the software for the AR7210BX you need to go to the, or do a search for wiki.beastx.com. That should bring you to the main page. If on the left hand side you click where it says information, and that'll load this page, and if you go to the bottom selection, look Studio X, Studio XM, and there you have it. It's then just a matter of clicking on one of these two links here, depending on whether you've got a Windows or a Mac operating system, and then you'll have Studio X available on your computer, which you can then use to connect to your Heli. So we're using Studio X version 3.2.1 on the Mac. If you've got a Windows system, then I suspect the version number is probably different. And as you can see, the firmware version that we have in the Heli is 5.1.3. It's a Pro Edition, so that means it's got all the various stability and bailout modes available on this version. So before we can start setting up the Heli using Studio X, the first thing we need to do is to bind the helicopter to the transmitter, and I'll show you how to do that now.